Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Our Stories, His Glory. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. So if you're in a bad mood, you've come to the right place today because we're going to laugh and giggle some. Because my guest today is going to be a friend of mine by the name of Kenn Kington, and you've probably heard of him. He's a Christian comedian, author, and motivational and inspirational speaker. But just as important, he's a husband and he's a father and he's a man who loves the Lord and he uses his profession to bring glory and honor to the Lord. But boy, he can double you over and make you laugh. And he's had things happen in his life he's going to tell you about. It hadn't been all roses. He's had a daughter that battled cancer. He himself has had quadruple bypass heart surgery. So I'm going to get straight into talking to him in a moment. I do want to tell you that he was born in Los Angeles and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. There's a dichotomy there, and he's the husband of one wife and the father of three children, two boys, one girl, and an adopted son. He's been on Comedy Central, Dry Bar Comedy, XM Radio, Laugh USA, which is where I heard him on one of my trips over and over and over. I just listened to it the whole time I was driving. Blue Collar Radio. He's had six comedy specials that have been on several multiple cable networks. He's written books. He's a motivational and inspirational speaker. I'm pleased to have Kenn Kington on today. And Ken, if you're still there after that introduction, how are you doing today, my friend?
All that I'm feeling really old right now to have done all that. So yeah, and I didn't think 50 was that old, but apparently it is to get all that done. But I did start early, and I gotta ask. I mean, I met you and got to know you a little bit as coach at Gardner Webb,
Yeah,
and that's the easiest profession to remember names because anybody you meet, you just go, "Hey, coach, how's it going, coach?" And but
yeah.
what do they call you now? Do they call you like doctor or reverend or I
Well,
know you teach it at a college. What do we call you?
that's a good question. I think I may need to figure that one out. A lot of the students that I teach still call me coach. They found out I coach, they call me coach. But we were just in a departmental meeting today, and they said they want us to start using our titles. And my title is professor, and I just feel like that I'm on Gilligan's Island if people call me that. And so I'm going to
Absolutely.
have to get used to professor instead of coach. Nobody says reverend too much. They probably see how I act and behave and decide that that doesn't fit very well for me. But I got to ask you. I mean, we did meet at a coach. The first time I heard you was a coaches convention. I think it was '96 in Atlanta, and you came and did your bit and at FCA, and it had a Christian background to it. And at that convention, if you hollered coach in the hall, 90 heads turned. So you were safe
Absolutely.
to be called coach there. But I got to ask you a question. With your a lot's happened to you since 1996, and you've become
Yeah.
you won't admit it, but you're a bit of a star. I wonder if I've always heard that stars are just like us. They put their pants on one leg at a time. So I gotta ask, is that your method for putting your pants on one leg at a time like everybody else?
No, I get on the bed and jump both legs in at the same time, and at a certain level, you're required to do that. So no, I'm just happy to have pants that still fit. But yeah, it's uncommonly humanizing. I did have a buddy of mine, literally, my wife had invited this couple over for dinner, and I had just done the single largest event I'd ever done in my career. It was in California, and it was simulcast to six different arenas. It was 60,000 people simulcast, and I was feeling pretty good. And we go to dinner that night, and actually, we had friends come over, and my buddy said, "What's the biggest event you've ever done?" I said, "That's amazing." And last night, I was in California, I did the 60,000 people, and he goes, "How do you keep your head from getting so big?" And I said, "Doug, I come home." I said,
Yeah.
"I walked through the door after the biggest event I ever did, and Heather said, 'Hey, the toilet's clogged. You need to fix that.'" And
Uh, I got home from some baseball trips, and that was
oh,
very similar. So your head doesn't get big because they don't want to hear when you get home how many people were at your concert, do they?
right, no, and I think you'll be able to relate to this huge. I actually did an event with the Orlando Magic, and actually did a chapel for the two teams, and the head coach of the Pistons at the time, and I think he actually coaches in New Orleans now. And the coach actually came into chapel, and I just we had our youngest son. He was in that little baby bucket. He's 22, 23 now, but sitting there, my wife was by the door with the baby, and two things stuck out to me. One, these massive NBA players walk in, got their game face on, and I've got 10 minutes to do a quick chapel, and every one of them walked around the corner, saw the baby, and became a human being. Every one of them leaned over,
Wow.
look at the baby, hey little baby, how's it going? And they started talking to my wife, and they're just human. Here's
Yep.
these multi-millionaire athletes, but the one that got me was the coach. And he came in, saw Heather and I, and he goes, hey, is that your first? And Coach Gentry is his name. I'm pretty sure he's in New Orleans. And he said, you need to take care of that one because they'll love you even when you're not winning. And I said, whoa, that's pretty stout. And he says, no, I'm serious. He said, I came off of a West Coast swing one time. We went 1-5, and I thought, walk through the door, I'm down from the trip, and my family's going to be bummed out. He said they could not care less. They were just glad Daddy was home. And I got to wrestle with my kids for an hour and realize this is what's important.
Yeah.
Do my best at work, but man, family's going to be with you. And that stuck with me forever. That was 23 years ago.
That's incredible. Alvin Gentry is who you're talking about, and he's actually got some roots, some ties native to this area where I'm living now in Shelby, North Carolina. So
really,
yeah,
well,
we're very familiar
he's
with
a
him.
rock star in my eyes.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that there's quality people out there. I want to ask you about your jokes a little bit. It takes a talent to think of and be witty enough to think up funny stuff, but it goes way beyond that. You have to see the world in some people will say a perverted way, but you also have to be able to write the things you see and think down, and in a way that is still humorous. You have to be a storyteller that can tell. Some people can take the most funny stuff, tell the story, and nobody laughs. But so to be a comedian and to get up on stage, you got to be able to think up jokes, write jokes, present them in words that are funny and in some kind of order that's funny. You got to have the right facial expression, but most of all, you have to have the right timing. So that takes a lot of what I would say is work. So I know that your humor and everything comes natural to you, but where do you get your material? Where do you get your ideas? Where does it all come to you?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I wouldn't use the word perverted either. I would say distorted. And what I mean by that is simply that I have, I was listening to a coach on a documentary yesterday. He says, sometimes your greatest weaknesses turn into your greatest strengths. And my life is that. I was diagnosed with a learning disorder very early before they even knew what dyslexia was. And I remember teachers trying to teach me how to read. And I didn't realize they called me a slow learner and a slow reader. And it wasn't that I didn't know the words of the letters, but my mind just exploded in details. And I saw details that other people just didn't see.
Yep.
And teacher asked me to read this one page, see Sally, see Jim and Sally chase Spot down the street. And they're like, what was the girl's name? And I was like, Cindy. And they're like, no. What was the boy's name? And I'm like, Tim. And they're like, no. And what were they doing? And then I just blurted out, this is the second grade. I said, well, there's two kids chasing a dog. What was the dog's name? Spot. How'd you know Spot? And I said, because it was a black dog with white spots. And they were running down the street. It was fall, and the leaves were half off the trees. And I described her dress and his street and how many cars were on the street and what color they were and all those. And they stopped. They said, whoa, that's not in the story. Stick to the story. Focus on the story. And even in second grade, I thought, yeah, it is.
It is in the story, yeah.
You can't see it. So my greatest weakness, which was a learning disorder, is actually my greatest strength, because I see stuff every day that just literally makes me laugh, and I'll just pull it out and I'll go, "Did you notice this?" A great example. I've just started this week. I had 3 shows, and we're now getting back in front of people, and I just with COVID, it's like, okay, And I asked the crowd, I said, how many of you have been in a restaurant? And they raised their hands. I said, now, how many have been in where you got to wear a mask till you get to the table, but when you sit down, you can take it off? I said, apparently COVID cannot penetrate about 4.5 feet toward the ground. That's the key. And I just go into all these details about, they say kids need to go back to school, and that just makes sense because elementary school kids are not over 4 feet tall, so they're completely immune. And that just led it into, I took a flight to Cincinnati, and I sat down, I took my mask off. They're like, no, you need to leave your mask on. And I explained to the flight attendant, I said, well, I'm sitting below 4 feet, so I don't really need to wear it. And she said, well, we're about to take off and travel at 30,000 feet, so you do need it. So
oh, like, she was good. That was a good answer.
But then even there, and I said, so now what I've learned is they said you can take your mask off if you're eating or drinking your snack. So I'm going to tell you, I can make a bag of Cheez-Its last for the entire flight. I just held one in my hand, and anytime they went by, I put it in my mouth. So apparently food and beverage repels COVID-19. So if you can't get a mask, just keep a bottle of water and some Cheez-Its and walk around with it by your face, and it acts like a mask.
So I think
just all those things, my mind just goes 100 miles an hour and goes, okay, this is funny to me, and apparently nobody else is noticing this. And so that's really where it comes from.
And it'll be funny to other people when they hear it, and somebody will say, right, that really is distorted. That really is.
Exactly.
And they'll enjoy it because they will wish they had thought of it first. That's what a lot of comedians do. They remind us of things we thought, yeah, we noticed that, but we didn't realize how funny it was.
Well, I didn't know how to say it or whatnot, because I'll have people come up and say that. I go, oh my gosh, I thought that same thing. And it's just a matter of going, okay. And you ask the question, and it's a little bit technical, but I have people all the time say, I shared that same thing you shared, but nobody laughed. And I'm like, well, it's the trifecta. It's what you say, it's how you say it, and it's when you say it.
Yeah.
And what you said was really true. It's the work goes into, when am I going to say this? What's the crowd? What's the environment? What's the details? And how you say it. So many people will tell a story without sharing the emotions of that story. And that's really what comedy is. It's just tapping in unconsciously to the emotions of the moment. But it is also the wordsmithing of just what words go where and what needs to be the same. But you're on the right track. You really hit it true. That's pretty good for an old ball coach.
Okay, that is, because I remember one time that I was following you on Facebook, still do, but you had put out something about, I don't know if you remember this, it was several years ago, and you put out something about the airlines, and you wanted to see what all people could respond. It would be funny about how slow the airlines was, and you actually liked my comment. I think I came in second place. I thought I was leading there for a while, and what I put is, our airline is so slow we have to speed up to stop, and that was pretty good. But then another person right below me said, our airline is so bad that even the terrorists won't fly us. And so, that's the one that kind of got first place. So I feel like I'm maybe on the right track. When you talk about the timing, I would like to, again, I'm not even in your league at all. When I do my writing and everything, I will go into that in a moment. But I want to talk about when you have that kind of, seems like distorted is the word of the day. When you have that, things come to your mind very quickly at times in situations, and sometimes maybe a person who's really funny doesn't have time to really take time to filter instead of letting that come out and not really have time to think about how that might be received in the present company. Has that ever happened to you with that sense of humor of yours?
Oh my goodness, not on purpose. I can say that, but I have been in the midst of a bit. Now, this is a little bit of comedy insight, is that there's kind of a rule of thumb. You don't try new material at the beginning or end. You always put it in the middle of other material. And I'll never forget that I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I had just gotten married, and it was the first trip that Heather had gone on with me to a show. And it was a dinner show, and she's on the front row, and I'm in a bit about relationships, and I said, some of you met my met Heather, and she and I just, and I wanted to say we recently got married. Um, it's great having a wife. I love having a wife. We just had got married, and what came out of my mouth was, "Some of you met Heather. She's my current wife," and and everybody just kind of laughed like it was a joke because like, oh, and then they just kind of moaned, and I was like, that is not what I meant
Yeah.
by that. They laughed even more, and I'm like, yeah. And she said that she's just full of grace, and she just kind of laughed and like, poor idiot, he's trying to improv, and so she was gracious about it. But it's just those mistakes can be funny, but it's that improv moment. But I don't think it's just comedians. I think everybody, and maybe it's trying to be witty, maybe it's trying to have a response or whatever, but they think, well, it just naturally comes out, and then realize, like, I mean, I can't imagine you have not had that in some capacity in your life. Does anything come to your mind?
Yes, it does. And when you mentioned about Heather, I think back to 1985 when I first started dating a young lady from the college, Appalachian State, and I was taken home to visit the family, and we were around the dinner table, and there was a couple. It was a couple of brother-in-law, her sister, brother-in-law, their parents, my wife's parents, my current wife. I end up marrying this girl that I was. I ended up marrying this girl that I was around the table with, and then some grandparents. And they started talking about religion, and they started talking about churches and how different denominations were different, and they were talking about, I wonder how they got their name. So they were talking about Quakers, and they said, well, in their services, they kind of would do the quaking thing. And then they said, well, there were some called Shakers, and they would actually shake during their service. And without thinking, I just said, I wonder what Episcopalians do. And there was this, I didn't even think, that just came to my mind, and I threw it out there. And there was this 2.5 second awkward, total silence. And then the grandmother just cracked up. The grandmother just died. And then all of a sudden, everybody died. And they laughed for 5 minutes. And I was thinking, this could have gone really bad. Um,
Oh,
I don't
and
know
you
that
know
if
what?
I don't know
When
that
you
if
owned it, though, it's even funnier.
yes. So I don't know if the grandmother hadn't started laughing if I would be married today because she kind of saved me. But yeah, I've found myself needing a little bit of a filter at times based on present company. So yeah, I can relate partially to what you were
Well,
saying.
knowing
So
your audience, that's huge, and
no,
I just love the way you set that up because everybody, a lot of people listening will have been in that situation and just go, and that's one of the greatest parts about comedy material, is when it's getting set up, you're thinking, oh my goodness, where is this going?
yeah,
And and it's that turn of, I wonder what Episcopals do.
yeah, yeah, and I still wonder what they do. Um, um, but, but okay, so yeah, we enough about me. We need to get back to you and all the things that you're doing, of course. And I want to ask you about some your faith journey and some things that involve that. And of course, you're welcome to tell me about your background growing up and those things. But I wanted to lead also into the things that your family, the challenges that you guys had with Kennedy Grace when she was small, and all of us that knew you were definitely praying for her when she was going through that. And it was very public knowledge, and she just looks great in your picture, by the way. She's fantastic.
Yeah, she's precious.
Tell me about your faith journey and how these bumps in the road along the way have affected you. And also, I want you to maybe refer to your heart bypass surgery too from 2016. Just tell me about all that as it relates to your faith journey.
Well, I'm really glad that your show is 12 hours long, so I'll just give it a shot. I think the parts that stick out is I think we do our most growing in times that are difficult. And I've also heard that comedy is just tragedy plus time. And I would agree with that. And just like we don't really understand, and I don't think I'll ever understand why that would happen to a 4-year-old little girl. But what came out of that, I have gained the understanding that God has a purpose no matter what. And to see the young lady she's become, to see her and my relationship is just so tight because of going through some of her foundational years and being there for all of it, and going to clinic and going to the emergency room. That first year, I think we averaged 3 times a week in the ER, and you can imagine how exhausting that is. And
Yeah.
it definitely, I'll say it shook my faith, but it didn't. It did. I think it gave me the freedom. It took my faith to a whole different level, and what I mean by that is, and I don't mean this flippantly, and I don't mean to be crude with it, but I remember going. There was one week where I was at the hospital like 5 out of 6 days in a row, and it was the middle of the night. She had a fever spike, and it was transitioning during the intensive part, and uh, she had a fever. It's 3 in the morning, and I'm driving her to Children's Hospital to the ER, and I got to tell you, Russ, I was just very honest. I'm like praying, not out loud, but in my mind, as she's in the back seat, and I'm like, God, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want? Give me a flipping break.
Yeah.
I mean, can we not have one night where we just get to sleep? And I was exhausted emotionally, physically, mentally, and at that moment, I heard her crying in the back seat, and I thought she was about to get sick. I said, Kennedy, are you okay? And she said, Daddy, I want to go home. And I said, baby, I know. And it just dawned on me in that moment, the one person she trusts is taking her to the one place she doesn't want to go. And
Wow.
how do you explain to a 4-year-old, baby, we've got to go here. If we get through this, then you got an 85% chance of survival. If we don't, you got about a 20%. And we got to do this. Well, you can't explain that to a 4-year-old. And as she sat in my lap in the hospital, we checked in. She's just nuzzled up. I just sensed God going, Ken, she's not going to understand this, and I want you to realize you're not going to understand this, but I want you to trust me the way she trusts you. And I'm telling you, that night I just broke, and I said, God, I'm going to be honest. I don't feel like it, and I'm not going to be okay if she doesn't make it, but I trust you.
Yeah.
And I got to be honest and just say I'm struggling. And I felt like an elephant was lifted off my back. I never looked back. I can't say that I was joyful through it, but what I tell people is that until you've cussed in a prayer, you may not be the level that you're completely real with God. And
right.
And not to be crude, but to be that level honest with God, I think He's not afraid of it at all. And He's like, I know, you're not going to understand it. And that verse in Proverbs just became very real. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, even when you don't feel like it, and in all your ways acknowledge Him. And I did, but it was very difficult. But the silver lining, just a couple of them in 15 seconds. My 2 oldest sons have a sensitivity that young men just don't have, and my daughter has this precious heart to just want to help anybody that is not normal, and she's just not caught up in herself and just precious. And I can draw it back to that. And there's some others, and there's some lingering pieces we've had to deal with, but that's probably one of the best examples of the hard side. Now, one of the fun, in the midst of tragedy, God even brings up comedy. And my wife had told me, hey, I just want you to know I was flying back in from an event. And I'm chasing rabbits all over the place, but
that's what I want you to do.
Well, we did an event. The AJC, the Atlanta Journal Constitution, had heard about Kennedy and me, and they're like, how do you do comedy when you got a child with cancer? And it really took me to a point where I couldn't explain it. And I told them, you can't. And they're like, well, how do you do it? And I was like, if I don't believe that God has a purpose for this, regardless of the outcome, and that He's with me through it, even when I don't understand, there's no way I could stand on stage, and there's no way I could be genuine, much less have joy. And I said that I know this probably doesn't translate, but without knowing God personally, the best we can hope for is to be happy, and that doesn't last very long. Usually Christmas and birthdays, but only God can give joy, which isn't involved with circumstances. And I've discovered joy at a whole new level. And they were like, oh my goodness. So it gave me a way to share what I was going through, and it was not preachy, it was just honest. Here's where I am. But one of the funniest things that happened is Heather calls me and says, hey, brace yourself. During intensive, she'd lost all her hair. And I come home, and here's this little bald-headed 4-year-old little girl with these piercing blue eyes. And I just said, Kennedy, I love your haircut. And she said, thanks. And I said, Kennedy, and I'd seen a couple dads do this, and I'm like, I'm doing that. I said, I want you to give me that haircut. And she said, what? And I said, I want a haircut like yours, and I want you to do it. Now, you haven't lived till you have a 4-year-old give you a haircut. And we're on the front porch for about an hour, and my wife came out halfway through it, and she just gasped, and she said, oh, wow.
Yeah.
She goes, you look like you have mange. And I was like, I know, right? And she said, can I fix it? And I'm like, no, baby, it's coming off. And every night we'd read stories, and Kennedy's rubbing her head against my head and just smiling ear to ear, going, Daddy, we're bald buddies. And I'm like, yes, we are. And I said, and she said, Daddy, can I have curly hair when it grows back? And I said, you know what? I think God will let you do that. And she did. She had chemo curls is what they call it when the hair grows back. And I'm just so excited that she's happy, and that I wanted her to know you're not alone. And she looks at me, she goes, Daddy, how do you want yours to grow back? And I said, baby, I just hope it does grow back. And it was just one of those moments. It's like, Lord, thank you. Thank you in the midst of this for that connection. And I just needed a laugh. And it was a great laugh in the midst of that. So, I mean, that's just some of the reality of going through those tough times. And you mentioned the heart thing.
Yeah.
One of my best friends came in the room the night before, and as a quick background, I had literally gone to the Y, worked out, felt fine, went to have a stress test, and it came back horrifically wrong. And they looked at some other tests which were horrifically wrong. And from the time I was at the Y working out to being in the OR for emergency quadruple bypass was about 30 hours.
Wow.
And I worked out, then went to have the stress test. They took me directly to CCU, and that night I had gotten all my affairs in order, and it was a very heavy day. My wife was told that all 4 of my arteries were over 99% blocked. And I don't know if you're good with math or not, being an athlete, but there's not a lot left after 99%.
Yeah, I can figure that one out. Yeah.
And the doctor told her, she goes, how is that even possible? And he said, I can't tell you he's going to make it to the surgery, much less through the surgery. And it was very heavy. And he literally, all he told me was, he said, hey, I don't mean to be dark. We're going to do all we can, but do you have your affairs in order? Because came to find out, he said, you got about a 60% chance tomorrow of making it.
Wow.
Very heavy. And Heather wanted to be there. She's a little bit stressed, trying to get home and take care of the kids for the next day. And just then my buddy walks in. And we're going to watch. It was the 7th game of the World Series for the Cubs and the Indians.
Yeah.
And God just brought him at that moment to give her a break. So I was done dealing with all the heavy, and I was just like, dude, thanks for coming. And he's like, yeah, and Heather got to leave, and he came in. And there was another part of the story I cover in the book, but it was just a moment of levity that only a best friend could do. And he sat down. He's like, "Hey, are they going to let you eat?" And I said, "Yeah, I can eat till midnight." And he goes, "Why don't I get us something for dinner?" And he slipped. And talk about saying the wrong thing at the right time. That was hilarious. He goes, "What do you want for your last?" He caught himself. I said, "Did you just want to know what I want for my last meal?" And he's like, and I'm like, "Dude, I needed that so bad." And we just laughed so hard. And I'm like, I needed that. And he didn't mean to say it, obviously, but it was like, "Lord, thank you. I needed that." And in the midst of all that, too, Rusty, it's been one of those where I realized I've really learned over the past almost 4 years now how to hear God's voice. And what amazed me is I always heard it before, but I didn't realize that was Him. And I give you my favorite example. So I'm coming out of surgery, things have gone well, and I'm still a little bit foggy, and they're giving me all these details, and I know it's God's voice, because anytime we're in a situation thinking, worrying, or whatever, and then something comes out of the blue to give us hope or joy, that's Him.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there, they told me coming out of surgery, they said, "Listen, your heart was stopped for about 2 hours. And the side effect of that is you are going to have some level of memory loss." And brother, I panicked.
Yeah.
And I was just filled with anxiety. I'm like, "What?" And I started thinking about my kids' names and my wife, and trying to think details. And I had the thought, I wish they would have told me this before the surgery. And God just whispered in my heart, "Well, maybe they did, and you just don't remember." And I started dying laughing, and I know they thought it was the anesthesia, but I was totally aware, and I'm like, "Lord, that was hilarious. Thank you. I just needed that."
So you're giving God the credit for that joke instead of taking it on your own, huh?
Oh, 100%. I was in no writing mood or comedic mood, and I'm like, "Lord, that was just awesome. I needed that."
I have a feeling that if somebody's down, that if they can take it the right way, that you could cheer them up real quick, but they better have some thick skin, um, because you did, and obviously your friend. I'm glad y'all got a big laugh out of that. So I want to ask, because that's great, and Ken, that's one of the reasons I've been really looking forward to trying to get in touch with you and get you on the show, because everything that you say, when I one time went recruiting in Lexington, Kentucky, and I had the school car, so I had Sirius FM or whatever that I never have, or whatever you have that you can XM radio, whatever it is, and I got on Laugh USA, and it was just it was clean comedy the whole time, and for 6 hours I just listened to this thing, and you would come on about every 30 minutes. I think you told me later that you maybe got 2 cents every time it came on, or 3 cents or something.
It's gone up. It's about 8 cents.
Oh, is it? You're getting 8 cents a pop now. I drove the whole time, and I was thinking I could listen to this all the way to California, because I don't have to worry about a word or a phrase, me going, "Oh boy, maybe should I turn it or not," because everybody was clean, especially you. But I also noticed that your comedy leads to a spiritual point, even if it's, and you don't disguise it, but sometimes you kind of think through and say, "Hey, there's a point in there that Kim was making," and that's why I wanted people to get to hear you today, because your heart comes out in that comedy, but your heart for the Lord really does. Now, so, and you've explained that that's part of your deal, but and if you want to elaborate on that, you can. But I got some more to ask you about your family. So tell me, do do you intentionally do that, or is that just your heart whenever you're doing your comedy, and we can see deeper into it and see that there's some spiritual points?
It's definitely increasingly. It is just part of who I am. I did a show the other night at a. It was an outdoor amphitheater at a on the other side of town. It was just, "Hey, we want you to come headline this. the owner of the comedy club was a friend from way back, and I said sure. And so it was not a Christian crowd. It was not a church. But I found that people, when you're just genuine, I'm not trying to preach to anybody, but I just see life funny, and I say, I believe that God made us this way, or I'll just naturally do that type stuff. But my favorites, and I think it was about 10 years ago, I was like, I love doing comedy, but what I really love is using comedy. And whether that's
Yeah.
to just encourage people and let them know, hey, you're not alone at like a comedy situation. I love that you mentioned Laugh USA because there's a new app and website called Dry Bar. And I was driving my kids to school, actually picked them up and driving home from school, and my two youngest were laughing in the back seat. I'm like, what is so funny? I said, Dad, it's this app. It's Dry Bar. Some kids at school are watching it. And I'm like, okay. And I was really leery. Dry Bar. I said, that sounds kind of cool. But they're like, yeah, everything is PG. And they've got some phenomenal comics on there. But they're all mandatory. They have to be PG or less. And they
Okay.
tell them up front, hey, if you can't work clean, you might do the set, but we'll edit it. We'll cut it.
Yeah.
So after I heard that, my kid said, Dad, you really ought to do one. So I had our folks get in touch, and I actually filmed one right before COVID, and it comes out in February. And it's free. You can get the app free. You can listen to as many as you want free and watch it free on your phone. So I'm really excited about the Dry Bar piece. But just with overall, I've already forgotten your question, but that distracted me. So what did you ask to begin with?
Well, I was asking how you, if it was intentional, the way you combined your comedy with, with the spirituality as well, and you did answer it, and you
Oh
did answer.
yeah,
You said it's naturally kind of you, and you get up there and be who you are, and that's a part of who you are. So, on behalf of,
yeah. But I love to pick events. I've done a lot of dinners, and I've done a lot of even fundraisers and that where there's a point to it.
yeah,
And I love using the comedy to draw to that point
right,
and validate great people doing great things. And it's so fun to watch an audience laugh really hard, and then you turn them right into a point. I did a date night the other night, and just talked about where I am an epic failure. And it just led to this final point of, what God laid on my heart was this is, cleave to one another. And here's the deal. I'm committed to do this. I know I'm going to mess up. I know I'm always going to be right. But I told my wife, I said, I don't care what else happens. I'm doing this together.
yeah,
And to be able to draw that point after a lot of fun was, yeah, you know what? We're in this together. And to draw it to a truth or a point or whatever, that's where I find the most joy. And I don't know about you, but God has taught me so much through everyday circumstances, my wife, but also He's taught me a whole lot about Him through my kids. And
sure,
it's been fun to. He'll hit me between the eyes and just go, hey, yeah, that was for you as well. Like Kennedy at the hospital, of just going, you know what? She doesn't understand this, and you need to stop trying. And why don't you crawl up in my lap and let me hold you like you're holding her? And little things like that are just like, wow, okay, I love that. Not all of them are funny, but man, I love it
yeah.
when God just speaks to me that way.
So, in my case, what I'm doing now, or actually, I mentioned before about writing and being syndicated. Yeah, I love to use syndicated when it was three newspapers. But anyway, now what I do is on Facebook, and as I mentioned, my family didn't always like being the subject matter for me. So what I've done now a lot of times is I've resorted to when I do my column, which is Wacky Wednesday Wisdom, and it has a Bible verse in it, but it's usually something wacky. And I've resorted to having conversations with my dog, and so most of my devotion, not most, but a significant portion of them are conversations between me and my dog, where I have to make up the dog side of the conversation, you know. And because my
Huh?
family has forbid me, like, don't put me in your little devotion, don't put me in your little column. And so Flash cannot not be in it because she doesn't object, because she doesn't have words to object. I think she would probably not want me to do it, but she doesn't really have a choice because she's a dog. But I've given her a personality because my family's kind of backed out on being in the public eye, so to speak. So you are much more nationally renowned and internationally. Now, how does your family feel about being your subject matter? And I'm going to get to Heather in a moment because boy, you give her a she gets top bill there when she mixes up some of her words, and you get a lot of laugh. You get a lot of laughs out of that. So tell me how they handle that.
Well, Heather is a totally different one. And I'll get to that. But as far as the kids go, I really did. I made a rule really early that with Heather, and I did it with her first. I made the rule that I will never share something on stage that she has not approved.
Okay.
And she approves 99% of everything, and the ones she doesn't approve of are really rare. But I'm like, okay, I won't use that. And the kids, when they were younger, now they really don't mind a lot. But I still ask them, hey, is that okay? And I'll never forget when my second son, he's probably about 9 years old, and he came up to me. He says, "Dad, you know that story that you tell about me?" And he told the story, and I said, "Yeah." He was like 3, and he's like, I don't know if I like you telling that." I said, "Buddy, I so appreciate you letting me know that." I said, "I tell you what, I'm not going to share any story about you that you're not comfortable with." And he says, "Thanks, I really appreciate it." And I said, "But I'll make you a deal. You tell me if there's any stories that I can share about you, and if it's okay, I don't want to embarrass you. I never want you to feel bad. But if you do say I can share one, I will give you a royalty. Do you know what a royalty is?" And he's like, "No." I said, "Well, when Dad's on TV or on the radio, they pay me a royalty to be there." And he's like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Every time I share one of your stories, I will give you $1 for letting me share that story."
A whole dollar.
At that time, yeah. So he just kind of looked and went, "Well, you share any story you want." And he just, and that turned into he and his brother would literally walk me to the door as I was going out of town, telling me all the stories that I told about them. And they went, "Hey, Dad, you remember what we did? You should tell that story this weekend." And they'd meet me at the door when I came home, and that was worth $5 anyway. And they're just like, "What stories did you share?" And I said, "Well, here's 3 for you, and here's
Yeah.
3 for you." And so it became a great connecting piece with them. But to this day, I try to get them to know, hey, you're more important than anything I write.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to start telling stories about my dogs. So that's a great idea. I like that one.
Yeah, I've had to have to do that. Now tell me about Heather mixing up her words. She allows you to pull that out on stage. So is that true? She
Oh
really
yeah.
does that occasionally?
Oh my goodness. Not only does she do it, I can't write them all down. Um, One of the most recent ones, and I love this. She and I were on a walk. I was going to perform at this big pastors convention, and I don't know what prompted her to say this because I'm never edgy. And she goes, "Well, they're a bunch of pastors. You need to be careful." And I'm like, "Be careful what?" She goes, "You don't want to push the bar." And I was like, "Push the bar?" And I'm sitting here trying to figure out what she meant. And I was like, "Oh," I said, "Yeah, that would really lower the envelope, wouldn't it?" And and she looked at me and she goes, "What does that mean?" And I was like, "Well, I don't think there's a bar at this, and I don't think pastors are going to want to hang out there anyway." And so she just missed it. But I noticed it when we first got married. One of the first ones ever. She was a teacher. Some other teachers had done something wrong. She tells me the story when she gets home, and she punctuates it by, "Yeah, and Monday morning the fan is going to hit the roof." And I was just like, did they not screw it in or what? And so she knew that she did them. Her whole family does them, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
But my favorite, to answer your question, was Karen Kingsbury is an author, has written a bunch of books, and it turns out her family loved my comedy. So she invited me and Heather to go on this girls' getaway cruise. And so we're on there, and I did my sets, and I did a little meet and greet and sign stuff. And this one lady came through, and she was just not happy. I said, "Did you want me to sign something?" She goes, "No, I needed to tell you something." And I was like, "Sure, go ahead." She goes, "I just think it's wrong for you to make up stuff about your wife like that." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's not made up." And she goes, "Well, I don't believe that." And I said, "Well, it's not." She goes, "Well, if it's not, then I can't believe it. Why would you do that? I'm sure she doesn't let you." And I said, "No, she has to prove everything before we go on stage." She goes, "I don't believe that." And I was like, "Well, she's right over there." And I pointed her out, and I waved to her, and she waved back. I said, "You can go ask her." She goes, "I'm gonna." And I'm like, there she is.
Yeah.
And I asked Heather later, how did it go? And she said she came up. She goes, "I can't believe he makes that up." And she goes, "Oh, he doesn't make that stuff up." She goes, "You really say that?" She goes, "Yeah, I've said all of it." She goes, "Well, I can't believe you'd let him do that on stage." And she goes, "Really?" She goes, "Yes." And Heather said, "Who do you think gets all the money for all the royalties from all of those bets?" And she was like, "What?" She goes, "I get every penny of it." And she said, "How do you think I got this purse?" And the lady was just like, oh, okay. And she's like, "Yeah, it's a good deal for me." I just smile and go, "Cha-ching." And so
And Kenn does all the work.
exactly. So she's an incredible sport. There's only been a couple times she's like, "Yeah, I'm not sure I like that one," and I'm like, "Okay, it's gone," and I'll never do it again. But she's so she's so comfortable in her skin, and she's the life of the party. And at our house, she is the funny one.
Really?
And my kids are the
Okay.
funny one. I'm the least funny person at my house. I have to go away to go be funny because
Yeah.
they're hysterical. And this is a theory of mine. You may be able to confirm this, but I'm convinced every kid, I don't care how great cool your dad is, you're a dad. You're not cool.
Exactly.
You're a dork, no matter what. And I played golf with Paul Bird a couple years ago,
Yep.
pitched for the Braves for a while, and he said, I said, "Your kids just love it." He goes, "Let me tell you about my kids. They play Xbox." And he says, "I was down there one day. They're playing Xbox baseball." He goes, "Hey, do you guys ever pick Dad to pitch?" And he said, they literally said, "No." "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I'm a professional pitcher." They're like, "Well, if you were good, you'd play for the Yankees." And they literally said that.
Oh,
but I'm convinced, like Bono, U2's one of my favorite bands. I'm convinced Bono's kids roll their eyes and they're just like, "Dad, you're so embarrassing." And so, yeah, you can't be cool no matter how cool you are.
Yeah, and you can have an audience of 20,000 people think you're cool, and they're still gonna say you're not. You're not cool, Dad. That wasn't. Yeah, they're gonna. So I know we're close to needing to wrap up here one time. But one time I was speaking, and it's probably been about 7 or 8 years ago. I released a book called "Top 10 Ways to Be a Man's Man in God's Eyes." The whole idea of about what is a real true man's man, and what would that look like if God made that definition. So I was speaking at a group one night. It was at a church, and they turned it into a whole weekend where we did kind of like a conference on Saturday night, and then I spoke at their church Sunday. So the night before I actually tried to contact you by Facebook or somewhere, and I didn't. But I showed a clip of of you because I felt like it really represented a man's man in God's eyes, and being a dad. And it's the one where you are talking about when you pull up at the stoplight in the family van, and your wife's in there, and your kids are in there, and there's candy wrappers or whatever. There's a little chaos, and you look over in I don't want to make I may get this wrong, but there's a guy in a souped up, really nice car, and you're thinking like, should I race him or not race him or whatever, and you look over there and he seems to have it all, and you look down and you say something to the effect, and that you wouldn't trade for anything in the world because you've got more love, you got more this, and then you also say, "I've got more comedy material than he does," and all this. I showed that clip that night to set the mood before I spoke, to let people know what they have is extremely valuable. And you've always modeled that really well, and you've expressed that really well today. So as we wrap up, I want to give you the last word about what you feel like your true. This is one of them deep ones, like at the hospital. What your true purpose is, what God put you here to do, and what you want your legacy to be with all that you're doing.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I'll answer it a couple different ways. One, I don't believe in legacy per se. I don't believe that we
Right.
decide that. I believe what we do is we live obediently and faithfully the best we can, and God determines that legacy. But you hit it on the head. 10 years after I'm gone, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of people even remember I existed. You may be able to, but I've asked this question several times at guys' events. I'm like, who won the Super Bowl 8 years ago? And nobody knows.
Right.
It's the most watched event, and it's not about moments in time. It's about the time we spend with what's valuable. And I'm very much in that way. And I'm very much right now just going, okay, Lord, how do I walk with you today? And how do I stay faithful with that? And I'm really now back to where I was 30 years ago when I left the corporate world and started this. And I'm literally back at that starting point. And within the last couple of weeks, God's just put on my heart, Ken, start over. Start over. Where were you then? And I was utterly dependent on God for
Yep.
everything. And he had laid on my heart then, and I'm back at it again, and I see where it's grown just to use what he's given me, gifts, talents, abilities, experiences, to draw people to who Jesus really is, and use those same gifts, talents, abilities, and experiences to encourage believers to experience what the real abundant life is all about, and to get rid of all the pretending and the posing and just be real. And I think that's what God allows me to do. You said something about self-effacing, and there's something contagious about when I share my failure
Yeah.
and my questions and my screw ups. With that event the other night with the couples, I share about one of my epic failures with my wife. And then I have all the guys after I share the story, and I said, guys, I want you to look at your wife, and I want you to use that pet name with her, and I want you to repeat these words, honey, and then honey, I said, at least I'm, and they're like, at least I'm not as bad as Ken. And it's just hilarious because everybody thought it, but it's just like, you know what? And I want people walking away going, wow,
Yeah.
somebody else is struggling too. Somebody else values their marriage over fame. Somebody else values their kids in all their craziness.
Yeah.
And I do. I believe it's a gift, and that's my heart. I want people to live the abundant life, and it's not health, wealth, and well-being. I've lost all of them, and yet got more joy and more peace and more hope than I've ever had in my life. So I would say that would be it, to use what he's given to just give.
That's fantastic, and I agree. Somebody asked me about legacy whenever I finished coaching, and I said I don't really care because I don't get to decide legacy.
Yeah.
Somebody else decides that. If you want to know what I wanted my legacy to be, I told people like go look up my former players about 10 or 15 years from now and see what they're doing. And if there's such a thing as legacy, that's what it'll be. And then
Yeah.
my family and what my boys grow up to be, and they're grown up now, but they're still in the, we're empty nesters, but they're still young and unmarried at the moment. And I want to see what they become, and I'm excited about that. So, real quickly, I want to your new book is Every Day is a Bonus, and if people did a Google search of that, Every Day is a Bonus, and maybe your name, Ken has two N's. You're the two N.
Yes.
Would they be able to find that book, or is there a special place they can go to get it?
Not yet. Not yet. It
Okay.
actually, I'm releasing it November 4th,
Okay, good.
and that's the 4-year anniversary of my open heart surgery.
Okay.
And it really is. It's the whole gamut of the three, I call them gifts, that God showed me that were there in my life already, but I wasn't fully opening them. That came out of that process. But the title comes from the thoracic surgeon who 2 weeks post, he said, Ken, I'm in the operating room. I'm looking physically at your heart with your chest open. And I asked my crew, why is that heart beating? There's no reason why you should be alive. He said, you should have had a massive heart attack 6-8 months ago, and there's no way you would have survived. He says, I don't mean to be morbid, but you need to treat every day like it's a bonus, because for you it is. And I have literally taken that to heart. And every day I wake up and go, well, looks like I got one more. And I enjoy and I experience, and I'm thankful for it. So it's basically the lessons that I learned from that experience, that everybody who wants to experience life as a bonus has to have. There's three gifts and you have to open them. So it's going to be great. And if they'll check on November 4th, there'll be information on all the social media. But if they want a good laugh, my Wow Moments, which is the award-winning comedy show, is free on Amazon. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch that right now. And we will release the book on Amazon. And there's a really good chance, if I'm going to tell this to your listeners only, the book will release on the 4th of November. 3 days prior, they can download it for free. And that's just for your listeners and one other group of listeners and a couple supporters. So if they want it, just every day's a bonus. 3 days, so November 1st, they can download it for free.
Well, I think I'm going to sneak online November 1st and be one of those listeners. I may have 7 or 8 listeners listening. Now we'll have a lot, because we'll have a lot of people listening, because I'm going to post it on your Facebook page too. So
nice.
That'll get, with your permission. But hey, here's what I want to say to you, Ken, as we wrap up. I truly appreciate what you're doing. I appreciated being able to turn that radio on and listen to people, you and people like you, and knowing that you're going to make us laugh and you're going to do it in a way that's honorable to the Lord. And I just want to tell you, without getting too sappy and too deep, I believe that you're everything that's right about Christian comedy, and I hope God will raise up more men and women like you to use their humor and their distorted view on life to bring honor and glory to Him. So I really appreciate you taking time. I've taken an hour out of your time, and I really appreciate that. And I hope people will use their story to bring glory and honor to God the way you have. And so I will tell you, I'll give you the last word, and then I'm gonna sign off here.
No, it's been a joy, and I just want to meet your dog one day.
Okay. Well, she barked a couple times while we were talking, so people probably already heard her a little bit. So, folks, our stories, His glories, every other week now. So, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back in 2 weeks with another edition of Our Stories, His Glory.